My name is Anne MacMillan, and I am the founder of the R.E.A.L 10-Step Neurodiverse Family Systems Approach and my own Neurodiverse Family Systems Theory. Let me tell you how I got to the point in my life in which I was taking on the major challenge of creating a neurodiverse family systems theory. I was born in the United States in the 1970s, and I was born into a neurodiverse family. I have a mother, a grandmother, and two siblings who are level 1 autistics. But back in the 1970s, diagnosis of children as level 1 autistics was very, very rare, if it happened at all. My siblings looked a lot like me. They are all very verbal. We are all very intelligent. And my family interactions with my siblings were full of a lot of verbal debating. We debated about many, many things much of the time, and sometimes those debates turned into physical conflicts too. So basically, from the time I was a very small child, I was managing a lot of conflict. I chose to create this neurodiverse family systems theory in part because I was very inspired by Damien Milton's double empathy problem. And if you're not familiar with Damien Milton, he is an autistic researcher out of the United Kingdom who makes the assertion that a lot of the conflict between autistics and non-autistics happens due to a breakdown in mutual understanding between these two different brains. And my objective in creating this neurodiverse family systems theory is to define why. What it is specifically that is occurring between the autistics and non-autistic brains that is contributing to high levels of conflict and even trauma in neurodiverse family systems. So let me go on a little with my life story. I grew up in this family where there was a lot of inexplicable conflict. I had no idea, of course, that there was any difference between my brain and my siblings' brains or my mother's brain. I had no explanation for the difficulties that I really did experience trying to interact with my autistic grandmother. All I knew was that those difficulties were there. As time went on, I watched my autistic siblings, whom I didn't know were autistic, of course, be reprimanded and punished when they were unable to manage the social world as was expected. They were bullied in school. The school system certainly didn't work for them. And over time, as I watched all of this happening, and I had no explanation as to why, I really took on the role of caretaker and peacemaker in my family. It was very, very important to me that my family was well and feeling good, but I saw so much around me that didn't make sense. It was very, very confusing, and that really incentivized me to do my best to ensure that my family members were as happy and feeling as much peace as possible. Now, I was a child, and it was much too big of a challenge for me at the time. It was something I tried to take on and tried to succeed at, but honestly, I did not succeed. By the time I got to my undergraduate degree, I decided that I wanted to try and sort out the confusion that I had witnessed in my family of origin. So I studied human development and family studies. And it was a fantastic degree. I learned so much about child development and what happens in family systems and why conflict may occur, but never at any point in time did anyone mention autism. This was in the early 1990s, so this was before Asperger's was put in the DSM in 1994. And even though I had attended the university in hopes of figuring out what had happened in my family and getting explanations for the conflict and the confusion that I had experienced, in addition to growing up in a neurodiverse family, I also grew up in a very conservative religion. And that means that when I was in my junior year of college, I decided that it was time for me to get married. That's what other people in my culture of origin were doing around me. And when I got married, I chose a man who was also a level 1 autistic. Now, of course, at the time, I didn't know anything about autism and certainly nothing about level 1 autism. And right after the marriage, conflicts began to happen that I had no explanation for. And again, I was in a place where I was experiencing a lot of breakdown in relationship and communication. And I was even then using all of the skills that I had picked up and learned in my undergraduate studies to try and resolve those conflicts, but was still managing a situation in which I felt I couldn't find the success that I really wanted. Then, of course, for someone from a conservative religion, it was time to have children. And as you may know, autism does have a genetic component, and it is not uncommon for level 1 autistic parents to give birth to level 1 autistic children. And in this case, we had level 1 autism on both sides of the family, and we could have anticipated having level 1 autistic children, of course, information about autism. In our case, we did have 3 children, yet none of them were autistic. At the same time, what I'm claiming and have integrated into my neurodiverse family systems theory is that there are 3 main neurodivergencies that often occur in neurodiverse family systems. 2 of those, most everyone is familiar with. One is autism, and the other is attention neurodivergence, or ADHD. The third neurodivergence, along with autism and attention neurodivergence, that I claim is often occurring in these neurodiverse family systems is what I call high body empathy neurodivergence. And I believe that I am a high body empathy neurodivergent, and that I am also a little attention neurodivergent, or ADHD. And that the fact that I was born into my family of origin with these 2 neurodivergencies is not chance, and that in reality, there is likely a genetic connection between these 3 neurodivergencies. But more research, I think, needs to be done. Research has already demonstrated, however, that there is coaggregation. Research has demonstrated, however, that there is coaggregation between autism and attention neurodivergence in the same family. In fact, autistics are more likely to be attention neurodivergents than non-autistics, and non-autistic family members of autistics are more likely to be attention neurodivergents than non-autistics who are not family members of autistics. So we already know that autism and attention neurodivergence, or ADHD, occur in the same families, and my hypothesis is that this third neurodivergence, high body empathy neurodivergence, is also occurring in these families. So my children, although none of them were autistic, were high body empathetic neurodivergents and attention neurodivergents like myself. And their father was autistic. What's interesting about my story that is also something that's occurring in many other neurodiverse family systems is that I was born into a neurodiverse family, and then I self-selected to marry a level 1 autistic man, even though I knew nothing about autism. And I have a hypothesis about that too. I think that individuals who are born into neurodiverse family systems and gain a familiarity with the interaction style of autistics have a sense of attraction towards autistics, and that it is actually very common for non-autistic members of neurodiverse families possibly high body empathetics, and possibly attention neurodivergents to marry autistics, even without knowing that that's what they're doing at the time that they tie the knot. So there I was, a young mother in a neurodiverse family that I still did not know was a neurodiverse family, raising neurodivergent children, none of whom were autistic, but who were also managing the differences between their brains and the brains of the people around them. And of course, they had a mother who was observing all of this and managing the differences between their brains and the neurotypical children, who were being very well served by the school system, even if my children weren't necessarily as well served. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. That had become the story of my life. I'd been trying to figure it out as a small child with my own family of origin, and then I married an autistic man, and I was still in a neurodiverse family, and I was still trying to figure out what was going on. Well, at that point, I decided to go get a master's degree in psychology at Harvard University. And while I was getting this degree, it finally occurred to me that my husband was a level 1 autistic. And this was a game changer. All of a sudden, I was able to look back at our life and all of the conflicts that we had had in our relationship and the difficulties that we had had co-parenting and the many different things that had happened, and start to make sense of them. Now, remember, at this point, I still don't know that my mother, my grandmother, and my siblings are autistic, but I am aware that my husband is autistic. So I went from there to do some of the world's first quantitative research on level 1 autism and marriage. And that was a very rewarding experience. My director was really pleased with my work and offered me the Director's Thesis Award. And I had an opportunity at that point to talk to Tony Attwood about my research. And in my conversations with Tony Attwood, he started talking about patterns in families that he had observed in his own clinic, even though there wasn't any research really to back that up. And he was interested in my research specifically because I had been able to demonstrate that individuals with a very, very low level of autism traits on a standard bell curve were more likely to be in relationships with autistic individuals than individuals with just a mid-level of autism traits. So when I talk about the bell curve like this, I am not saying that everyone in the world is autistic. A bell curve represents every person in the world. This bell curve represents every person in the world, the entire population. And only the people all the way out on one far end are considered autistic when we're plotting levels of autism traits. And the people in the middle of the bell curve are the neurotypicals. But there are also these people all the way on the other side of the bell curve who have a very, very low level of autism traits. And these are the people who tend to be in relationships with autistics. And these are the people who I'm claiming are the third neurodivergents or the high body empathetics. And I'm hypothesizing that there may also be a genetic link between these high body empathetics and the autistics, and of course also the attention neurodivergents in these neurodiverse family systems. All right. So that was my conversation with Tony Attwood, and I still didn't know that my siblings or my mother were autistic. But then I started going back in my mind to memories of my grandmother and my interactions with her and the way she spoke to me, and I realized that that pattern was very, very similar to the way that my husband had spoken to me during our marriage. And I finally made the connection that both my grandmother and my husband were level 1 autistics. And then it took me a couple more years, honestly, even though I was doing this research and making all of these connections, it took me a couple more years to realize that my mother was also autistic. And then still more time before I finally came to the conclusion that 2 of my siblings were also autistic. So here I was in this world of psychology and research and autism, talking to Tony Atwood, making all of these connections. And that is how long it took me to come to the conclusion that the people that I had grown up with since I was a very, very small child were level 1 autistics. Well, at that point, I felt like, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit of a handle on what's going on here. And I had explanations finally as to why many of the services that my siblings and my family members and I had always sought from the professional community, why many of those services never worked. And the answer was that the professional community was assuming that we all had the same brains, that none of us were autistic, and that the professional community was projecting, so to speak, a non-autistic or a neurotypical brain onto the members of our family when we weren't neurotypical. And therefore, the solutions that they offered didn't really have any effective application to our problems, leaving us feeling alone and frustrated and as if there was something that we couldn't define that was just wrong with us that facilitated all of this conflict and even trauma in our family interactions. Because again, in reality, there was a lot of breakdown in mutual understanding between the autistics and the non-autistics, just like Dr. Damian Milton says. So at that point, I thought to myself, okay, I can see that the professional community doesn't really understand what's going on. And it's not their fault that they don't understand what's going on. I had a master's in psychology and a bachelor's in human development. And honestly, it was only me who figured out the level 1 autism thing. It wasn't anything that I learned in class. And so I decided that, well, I would open up a private coaching and consulting practice in order to support adults in neurodiverse intimate life partnerships to see if there was anything I could do to support them in managing the practical difficulties that they were having in their relationships, considering that I was starting to get an idea of what was really occurring due to the difficulties of the neurodiverse communication and the differences between the brains. But, to be completely honest, I didn't know if I would be able to do anything to help anyone. All I knew was that the professional services that were already out there and available weren't meeting the needs of level 1 autistics and their neurodiverse families. So I took on the challenge, and I didn't succeed very much at first, but slowly over time, I felt that I was able to support individuals in finding solutions that actually worked for their lives. And this made me excited. It made me think, wow, maybe there's something here, something that I might be able to offer the world that could be very, very valuable and could support the many, many people in our world who are in neurodiverse families and who are managing this breakdown in relationships inside their family systems. We often talk about the fact that autism affects social relationships, while we forget that the family is a social relationship and that intimate life partnerships and marriages are the most intense kind of social relationship on this planet. And yet there is so little information about how neurodivergence and neurodiversity is impacting these intimate life partnerships. So that led me to really think through what I had learned myself through my life experience, what I had learned in my research degree in psychology, and all of the incredible wisdom I learned from my autistic and attention neurodivergent and non-autistic and neurotypical and high body empathetic clients in my own practice in order to propose a neurodiverse family systems theory based also on some of the incredible research that many scientists are doing. One scientist that I especially integrate into my neurodiverse family systems theory is Vittorio Gales, and he did research on monkeys and coined the term embodied simulation. I talk about what embodied simulation has to do with empathy and the fact that both autistics and non-autistics have empathy. We have empathy differences, but it's not true that autistics don't have empathy or that non-autistics have more empathy. What's true is that autistics and non-autistics have different kinds of empathy, and that these differences in empathy contribute to Damian Milton's assertion that there is a breakdown in mutual understanding. So I am very excited to share my neurodiverse family systems theory with the world. And because I understand that we don't just need another theory, but we also need very practical solutions, I have organized my neurodiverse family systems theory into a practical 10-step approach that providers can use to guide their clients through understanding, hopefully, what is really going on in their difficult interactions with, support their clients through understanding what is actually going on in their difficult interactions, so that their clients can therefore use that information in order to make life decisions that will bring them the happiness, hopefully, and the peace that everyone deserves. In addition to an educational component that supports autistics and non-autistics and all members of neurodiverse family systems in understanding what is going on when they experience this mutual breakdown in understanding, I provide several quantitative assessments that all individuals in neurodiverse family systems can use in order to better understand the differences between what they are experiencing in the world and what their family members are experiencing in the world. Autism is very heterogeneous, and you've probably heard a million times that if you know one autistic, you only know one autistic. So I propose that we need to stop talking about autism as only one spectrum and realize that there are likely many different spectrums within autism. So with that in mind, I define 5 different empathy spectrums. And again, I use all of this information in a very practical way in order to support all members of neurodiverse family systems as they work through the specific challenges that they are facing in their lives. And for example, this theory can be applied to conflicts with one's colleagues at work, in the workplace. Many level 1 autistics are facing many challenges in the workplace, and human resources professionals can use neurodiverse family systems theory in order to support neurodiversity in the workplace. This theory can be used to help individuals as they manage dating, and hopefully to be able to select intimate life partners that are more likely to be good for them long term. One very common thing that I see is individuals selecting intimate life partners at a young age, and that these intimate life partnerships aren't really particularly viable long term. This theory can be used to support neurodiverse parenting. Again, we need to remember when we're talking about parenting that the neurology of the parent and the neurology of the child matter. An autistic parent is going to have a very different relationship with a non-autistic child than an autistic parent will have with an autistic child. That just makes sense. So when we're talking about parenting, we also need to be talking about neurology and neurodivergence. This theory can be used to better understand the trauma and the conflict in neurodiverse intimate life partnerships, and can support individuals towards finding solutions that will really work in their lives. This theory can be used to help individuals understand what's happening in neurodiverse divorce, so that steps can be taken to prevent high conflict divorces and support families as they maintain better relationships during and after divorce. And I have many, many thoughts and offer solutions to support neurodiverse families from being exploited by predatory family law attorneys who, unfortunately, in many of the countries of this world, are taking extreme advantage of neurodiversity during the divorce process. And this theory can be used to support people in understanding why estrangement does tend to happen in neurodiverse families, and how to think about that, and when to find solutions and times to bring people back together when it is appropriate. And as I started the story of my life, and to bring things back full circle to my childhood, this theory can also be used to support adult sibling relationships and help people understand in their adulthoods what was going on as they were children experiencing conflict with their siblings, and also what they can do today to recognize the way in which neurodiversity is continuing to facilitate conflict among neurodiverse adult siblings, so that hopefully people can come together and find the happiness and peace and the family relationships that everyone deserves. This is me. I am Anne MacMillan, and I completely understand that proposing a neurodiverse family systems theory means that I may be getting some things right and I may be getting some things wrong, but I feel for myself, due to the extreme levels of conflict and trauma and difficulties that many of the people in my life that I care about and love, including myself, have faced, that I owe it, that I maybe can contribute to resolving some of these problems by at least proposing this theory, so that other people can come along and decide which parts of it to use and which parts of it to not use. And I'm excited to have been able to add quantitative assessments and to hopefully bring us to a place in which we can start doing some research so that we can find some evidence-based solutions that will support families much better than the services that my family and I were constantly trying to engage in from the professional community. This is what I have done with my over 50 years of life experience in a neurodiverse family system, my over 20 years of life experience in a neurodiverse marriage, my education, and the time I've spent learning from my incredible clients from Neurodiverse Family Systems. This is what I've done with all that experience and knowledge, and I hope that something good will come for all of us from Neurodiverse Family Systems. Again, I'm Anne MacMillan from realneurodiverse.com.